The boarding pass was torn from her hand, the sharp scrape of paper slicing through the air like a knife. "Step aside. People like you do not board first." The words cracked through the atmosphere at Gate C23 of Chicago O'Hare, an invisible slap in front of dozens of staring eyes. No one said a word. No one intervened. People only watched, judged, and silently concluded that a troublesome passenger was being corrected. But they had no idea that this moment would set an entire airline on fire, because the woman being humiliated was not an ordinary traveler. She was Alexandra Pierce, 38 years old, a self-made billionaire, the new owner of SkyVista Airways, a woman capable of breaking an entire system with a single sentence. Yet this morning she stood there in a grey hoodie, silent as a shadow, allowing the other woman to keep digging her own grave. Alexandra pulled the hoodie strings closer to her face, hiding the razor-sharp gaze that could silence boardrooms instantly. Her clothes were not expensive, not flashy, offering no hint that she was the woman who had shaken the aviation industry with a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. Today she was not a CIO, not a chairwoman, not the person who once fired hundreds of senior managers in 60 minutes. Today she was an anonymous passenger in seat 24B, surveying the toxic culture she suspected was rotting her company from within. The waiting area at Gate C23 was filled with boarding announcements, the thud of suitcase wheels against tile, and the weary sighs of late travelers. No one knew who she was. No one recognized her. And that was exactly the point. Alexandra took note of every detail: the stressed ground staff still trying to smile, the first-class passengers being handed champagne at the door, the young mother with a baby being ignored, the Hispanic family told to move back to make room for someone more important. She recorded everything. Nothing was overlooked. These were no longer isolated incidents. This was the smell of something deeply sick, a cultural tumor. Then Brenda Collins appeared. She emerged from the jet bridge like a blade pulled from its sheath. Her blonde hair was tied so tightly it pulled at her scalp, her uniform crisp, as though it had never known a wrinkle. But her appearance was not what made her dangerous. It was her attitude. Brenda did not look at people. She sorted them. A businessman in a blue suit approached, and Brenda smiled as brightly as stage lights. "Welcome back, Mr. Whitmore. It is an honor to serve you." An elderly couple followed, and her voice softened as she helped lift their luggage like an angel descending. A young family with a small child earned a deep frown. "Step back. Your group has not been called. Do not slow the line." But when her eyes landed on Alexandra, the smile vanished instantly. Not because Alexandra caused trouble, not because she asked questions, simply because Alexandra did not look like the type of person Brenda wanted to serve. She had no idea she was staring into the face that once appeared on the cover of Forbes, no idea she was seconds away from destroying her own 20-year career with her behavior. Alexandra stood there in her plain hoodie, calm as an iceberg. She said nothing, only watched, only waited. Group 1 now boarding. The line moved. Brenda stood guard at the entrance like the keeper of heaven's gate. When wealthy businessmen passed, she bowed her head slightly. When the elderly couple passed, she patted their shoulders kindly. When the Hispanic family struggled with the stroller, she exhaled loudly. Group 4, do not stand here. But when Alexandra stepped forward, Brenda yanked the boarding pass from her hand, as if grabbing trash. 24B, she said, her voice colder than metal. Yes, Alexandra replied. Brenda did not look at her. Not even briefly. Only one carry-on. Do not block the aisle. We do not have time to fix overhead bins for you." Then she turned to the next passenger, and her face lit up instantly. "Welcome aboard, sir. 2 faces. 2 worlds, 1 person." Alexandra typed into her phone. Brenda Collins. Discriminatory behavior. Logged 0913. The jet bridge was narrow and cold, smelling of metal and stale air conditioning. Alexandra walked slowly, her mind settling like a lake before a storm. She knew people like Brenda. She had met them in boardrooms, in financial meetings, in major deals where men assumed a black woman could not understand strategy or valuation. Always the same look, "You do not belong here." But today Brenda had chosen the wrong target. Seat 24B was cramped like a box. Alexandra sat down, enduring the heavy breathing of the large man in 24C and the awkward fumbling of the student in 24A. No one knew who she was, and no one needed to. That anonymity was liberating. She was not a CEO here, not the most powerful person in the room. She was just a woman judged by her hoodie, exactly as she intended. When the plane prepared to close its doors, Brenda passed row 24 for the first time. Seeing Alexandra, she lifted the corner of her mouth in a familiar smirk, the kind worn by those accustomed to holding authority over people they believe are beneath them. Not hate, not anger. Just contempt, a contempt fed by years of serving first-class passengers, shallow compliments, and the belief that she was above others simply because no one corrected her. Brenda lived inside an illusion of power, and Alexandra intended to see how deep that illusion went. She closed her eyes for 1 second and inhaled everything that would follow the insults, the blow, the false accusation, the investigation, the lawsuit, the reform. None of it had occurred yet. But all of it stood right at the doorstep, like a storm waiting to be unleashed. She felt it. She sensed it. She heard each shift in the atmosphere, like tightening drumbeats. Toxic culture always begins with small things. A wrong glance, a selective smile, an innocent-sounding remark. And today, Alexandra would let it expose itself fully until the person responsible burned themselves down. Not because she sought revenge, but because she needed the truth, needed to see exactly what had rotted SkyVista from the inside. She could not fix what she could not see. And Brenda Collins, with her two-faced smile and scrutinizing eyes, was the doorway to that truth. Alexandra opened her eyes. The service cart began to move. The cockpit door clicked shut. Brenda's seatbelt snapped at the front. The false order was ready to be exposed. A covert inspection, a domineering flight attendant, a disregarded passenger, and a CEO hidden in the middle of a cramped row. In a few hours, Brenda would beg for a second chance. But that chance died the moment she tore the boarding pass from Alexandra's hand. The aircraft door closed. The game began. Brenda pushed the service cart out of the galley with a decisive stride, the wheels scraping against the carpet in a dry, brittle sound that felt like a warning. She drifted past the front rows with a smile, soft as silk, reserved for the people she believed were worthy. Then, the moment she stepped into the rear section, that smile shut off completely. No more warmth, no trace of basic courtesy, only controlled judgment and the small-minded authority she believed the cabin owed her. When the cart stopped at row 24, Alexandra knew exactly what was coming. She sat upright, her expression calm as a still lake, but inside she was freezing over layer by layer. Brenda served the man in seat 24C with a sweetness so forced it almost echoed. She handed him the exact brand of soda he wanted, filled his cup with ice, and bent just enough to make him feel respected. Then she turned to the student in 24A, calling him honey and smiling as if he were the only person she genuinely cared to be kind to. But when Brenda's eyes dropped to Alexandra, the smile vanished instantly, as if it had never existed at all. She pretended Alexandra was invisible, pushing the cart forward with cold precision, as though the woman in the middle seat didn't exist. Alexandra waited until Brenda was almost past the row before she spoke, her voice low but unmistakably sharp, like a blade sliding across glass. "I have not been served." Brenda froze. She turned her head slowly, irritation tightening her features. It was the look of someone forced to respond to a person they didn't respect. Her voice came out clipped and cold. "What do you want?" Alexandra didn't flinch. "Black coffee." Passengers behind them leaned in, sensing the air tighten the way pressure shifts before a sealed room locks shut. Brenda glanced at the lower tray of the service cart. The coffee pot was still full steam, fogging against the lid. But she turned back to Alexandra and said bluntly, "It is finished." Alexandra looked at the pot, then back at Brenda, seeing through the entire performance. "That pot is full!" Brenda's face flushed a deep red. Being exposed in front of others struck right at the fragile ego she hid behind her perfectly pressed uniform. Her voice dropped to a harsher register. "I said it is finished. Do you understand?" Alexandra answered softly, but with the precision of a scalpel. "You are lying." A small wave of whispers rose from row 23. Brenda heard it. Brenda hated it. She shoved the cart forward, bottles of mini liquor rattling violently inside, each clatter exposing her anger. Alexandra remained still, but something inside her cracked. Not over a cup of coffee, but because the system was revealing its true nature, something rotten to the core. 1 hour later, Alexandra needed to use the restroom. She turned to the man in seat 24C and asked him to give her space. He refused to look at her, shifting his knees only a fraction, creating a gap so small no human could pass through. She repeated her request, still polite. "You need to stand up." The man sighed dramatically, as if she had insulted him. "My God, can you not wait?" Alexandra looked straight at him. "No, I cannot." Brenda, stationed at the back of the cabin, heard the faint tension, but inside her mind, it was not a normal exchange. It was a signal, an opportunity. Brenda stormed toward them, each step hitting the carpet like a stamp of territorial ownership. She stopped beside Alexandra, her expression sharpening like a blade ready to strike. "What is happening here?" Alexandra stayed calm. "I am trying to go to the restroom." Brenda crossed her arms, cold as steel. "No, the seatbelt sign is about to turn on. We are entering turbulence." No light was on. No turbulence. Nothing except a blatant lie. Alexandra locked eyes with her. "The sign is off, and you are using a false reason to stop me from moving." Brenda's jaw tightened. The man stepped aside, sensing something dangerous and unfamiliar settling into the air. Brenda leaned in closer, whispering with venom so concentrated it nearly had weight. "People like you always want to create trouble." The entire cabin froze. No whisper, no breath. Only those 4 words hanging in the aisle like a naked accusation. Alexandra felt something inside her go still, not boiling, not erupting, just still. The stillness of a storm gathering all its power into a single point. She stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not escalate. She did not create a scene. She spoke each word with the calm force of steel being engraved. "This conversation ends here. I am going to the restroom. When I return, I will request your name and your employee identification number for an official report." Brenda stepped back, not out of fear, out of confusion. She did not yet understand what she was standing in front of. She only knew she had been challenged, and Brenda Collins never accepted losing to anyone she believed she was superior to. Alexandra walked past her, heading toward the rear of the plane. Brenda stood frozen, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light, the kind found only in people who feel their power slipping out of their hands. Alexandra did not turn back, but she knew. When she returned to seat 24B, the storm would detonate, and that moment would determine the fate of Brenda Collins, of Flight SV829, and the future of SkyVista Airways. Not because Alexandra wanted it, but because Brenda had chosen the wrong woman to humiliate, the wrong person, the wrong moment, the wrong way, and that mistake was heading straight toward her, unstoppable and irreversible. Outside, the plane floated through peaceful skies, but inside row 24, a storm was preparing to collapse, the entire fragile illusion of authority Brenda had relied on to survive. When Alexandra returned to row 24, the air had changed color. Eyes darted away, whispers were swallowed the moment she passed, and it felt as if the entire cabin was holding a shared breath, waiting for something to explode that no one dared predict. The man in seat 24C sat rigid like a statue, avoiding any possible contact. The student in seat 24A was so tense his hands clutched the edge of his pants. Alexandra did not need long to understand. It had already begun. Brenda appeared the moment Alexandra sat down. She did not come alone. Beside her was Thomas, his face pale, the face of a man dragged into a situation he did not have the courage to escape. Brenda was different. She walked forward as if stepping onto her own battlefield, her eyes gleaming with the strange brightness of someone convinced she was about to win. Her voice rose louder than necessary, clearly meant for everyone around them to hear. "Ma'am, I am informing you that your disruptive behavior has exceeded acceptable limits. This is your final warning. If you continue, I will report you to the captain, and you will be detained when the plane lands." Alexandra sat straight, her hands resting lightly on her knees. No panic, no rush, no fear. She looked at Brenda, the way one observes a malfunctioning machine destroying itself. "In what way have I been disruptive?" Brenda did not answer Alexandra. Instead, she turned to the nearby passengers, her voice trembling with the exact performance of a victim. "She threatened me. She refused to follow crew instructions. She was hostile. I was doing my job and she verbally attacked me. A blatant reversal in front of people who had witnessed the truth. Whispering spread." A few passengers looked at Alexandra, but none were brave enough to speak. Brenda continued, still in the tone of a fragile victim, fighting to protect herself. "She is aggressive. I am worried about the safety of other passengers." Alexandra lifted her phone. A small, calm movement. Yet Brenda recoiled as if she were seeing a weapon. Alexandra turned on the camera. A small red light appeared on the screen. Her voice sounded low-cold and entirely in control. "Brenda Collins, you are fabricating a false narrative. You refused to serve me, even though coffee was available. You lied about safety procedures. You deliberately obstructed and humiliated me. I am recording everything for an official report." Brenda's face turned purple. Anger sharpened her features like needles. She snapped, losing all control. "You cannot record me. That is a violation of privacy." Alexandra answered softly, her voice light as air but sharp as steel. "This is a public space, and I am protecting myself from your abuse of authority." Brenda could not bear it any longer. The tension that had been building since the moment Alexandra boarded the plane broke in a violent burst. Brenda lunged, not to grab the phone, not to block the camera, but to reclaim the power she believed she was losing. Her hand swept through the air, a brutal, uncontrolled strike. The phone was slammed into Alexandra's face. The sharp crack echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. A wave of gasps rippled across 3 rows. The student cried out in panic. The man in seat 24C jolted so hard he nearly dropped his laptop. Alexandra's lip split. Blood appeared in a bright red line on her skin, like a mark that could not be erased. Brenda froze. She had not meant to strike Alexandra directly in the face, but everyone saw it. The video was still recording. Alexandra bent down, picked up the phone. The screen was cracked like a spider web, but the recording icon was still glowing. She lifted the phone, and her voice dropped to something dangerously calm. "You struck me." Brenda stepped back, panic flashing across her face for a single second before snapping back into the familiar survival instinct of someone who had lived her entire life through lies. She shouted with unnecessary volume. She hit the phone into my face. "Thomas, you saw it, didn't you? She attacked me." Thomas stood frozen. He looked at Alexandra, then Brenda, then at the dozens of eyes burning into him. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Brenda began stuttering, clinging desperately to the story she had invented. "She is aggressive. She recorded illegally. We need her moved to the lower cabin immediately. We will report her as a level 2 threat." Alexandra did not stand. She did not retreat. She did not show fear. Her voice came out clear, sharp, and perfectly steady. "I am not going anywhere. I am the passenger who was attacked, and anyone who tries to remove me from this seat will be committing an additional offense." She looked directly at Brenda. "Your mistake has been recorded. There is no escape now." The intercom chimed at that exact moment. The captain requested all passengers remain seated due to a security incident in the middle cabin. The cabin froze. Brenda turned pale. Thomas stepped backward as if trying to disappear. Alexandra sat there with blood on her lip, her eyes cold as ice under the cabin lights. And that moment marked the inevitable collapse of the entire performance Brenda had built since the beginning of the flight. When Alexandra returned to row 24, the atmosphere had changed entirely. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. The silence inside the cabin felt thick like mud, heavy enough that everyone sensed it pressing against their chests. Brenda was out of sight, but not out of anyone's mind. Those who had witnessed everything knew that the moment the plane touched the ground, this would no longer be an ordinary flight. It would be the moment everything detonated. When the wheels touched the runway, the aircraft shuddered lightly, but that tremble was nothing compared to what waited outside. Alexandra did not wipe the blood from her lip. She did not lower her head. She did not hide her cracked phone. She sat tall as if awaiting the review of a report whose conclusion she already knew could not be denied. The intercom clicked on. The captain's voice filled the cabin tense beneath an attempt at calm. For security reasons, all passengers must remain seated. Airport security will be boarding immediately. Brenda emerged at the front, then walking among a forest of eyes that refused to meet hers. She stood near the door, arms crossed, attempting to present herself as a wronged victim, waiting to be protected by justice. But those who had seen everything also saw her shoulders shaking. The aircraft door opened. 2 airport security officers stepped inside, each footstep solid, and controlled their eyes, cutting across the cabin. One was Officer Ramirez's broad-shouldered expression, locked. The other was Officer Chen, his eyes sharp, practiced at slicing through layers of lies. Brenda immediately rushed toward them, building her story before anyone else could speak. "Officer, thank you for coming." She pointed toward row 24, forcing a tremble into her voice. The passenger in 24B was disruptive, refused to follow instructions, and attacked me. I was performing my duties, and she, Brenda, tried to summon tears, but failed. Officer Chen did not change expression. He scanned the cabin, taking in details. He saw Alexandra sitting silently with blood on her lip and a cracked phone in her hand. He saw Thomas standing in the back, white as paper fingers twisted together. He saw the passengers pretending not to be involved, even though their eyes were locked onto the 2 women at row 24. Officer Chen approached. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us." Alexandra lifted her gaze. Her voice was calm, clear, and so steady it made the entire row swallow hard. "I will cooperate, but I am the one who was attacked. She struck me, and I have video." A single sentence shifted the entire axis of the cabin. Both officers glanced at Brenda. Brenda's face blanched for a single heartbeat before she scrambled to return to the familiar performance. "She is lying. I was threatened. I was only doing my job." She was aggressive. Chen raised a hand, silencing her. He looked at Alexandra. "Your phone, Alexandra," raised the shattered device. The video was still recording. Chen saw the blood on her lip, the red mark on her cheek, the unshaken composure of someone who had been wronged, yet stayed centered. He did not declare a conclusion, but something in his eyes changed. "Please step off the aircraft with us, so we can take your statement." Alexandra rose, lifted her backpack, and moved without a single unnecessary motion, without shame, without fear. She walked past Brenda, her eyes brushing Brenda's for a single second. And in that 1 second, Brenda understood that the worst had not yet happened. The officers led Alexandra out first. Brenda remained waiting to be escorted, as the victim she believed she was. But her face twisted when Officer Ramirez said, "We will need your statement later." When Alexandra stepped off the plane, the white airport lights illuminated her face, highlighting the streak of blood. Passengers near the front stared, their expressions a mix of shock, fear, and realization. Because no one who sat in row 24 failed to sense that what happened was far deeper than a simple argument. Those who live on borrowed power always believe they are right until the truth stands up and walks out, leaving them behind, trembling in the bright glare of consequence. Alexandra walked forward without looking back. She did not need to. Brenda had already sealed every exit the moment she swung her hand. And the door leading to the passenger terminal was also the door leading Brenda Collins into a new world, where every lie would be peeled apart, layer by layer, where every action would be examined down to the bone. Alexandra's shadow stretched across the cold concrete floor, steady and unwavering. Brenda's shadow flickered behind her, shrinking with every step taken by the truth walking ahead. The small airport interrogation room glowed faintly under strips of cold, white fluorescent light, the kind of light that exposes every lie in its path. Alexandra walked in first. She sat on the metal chair, her back straight, her eyes steady. No trembling, no panic, no fear. Officer Chen sat across from her. He set a small notebook on the table, his gaze dropping briefly to the dried blood on her lip. He had met many people who claimed to be victims, but eyes like forged black steel were not the eyes of a liar. "Your name, Alexandra Pierce." Her voice was low, slightly raspy, from compressed tension, but unwavering. "Age 38. Chen wrote it down, then asked without hesitation, "How were you struck?" Alexandra placed her cracked phone on the table and turned the screen toward him. She swung into my phone, slamming it directly into my face. "I have the video." Chen lifted the phone and pressed play. The sharp smack echoed through the room, so clear the air itself seemed to vibrate. Alexandra did not look away from him. I asked for coffee. She refused, even though the pot was full. I asked to step out to use the restroom. She lied about turbulence. She called me people like you. She fabricated a story, claiming I attacked her. Chen set the phone down and looked into her eyes again. In the long silence that followed, he realized she was not just describing an incident. She was describing something rotten that had existed in this industry for far too long. Outside the room, Brenda stood pressed against the wall. Sweat dotted her forehead, her face ghost pale. She heard the interrogation door slam, and her heart nearly stopped. When she was finally called in, Brenda slipped instantly into her practiced victim performance. I have never seen anyone so aggressive. I followed protocol, but she refused to cooperate. I was terrified. She hit me with her phone. Thomas stood outside the hallway, whispering to himself, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He had seen the slap, with his own eyes, but he also knew Brenda could drag him down with her, if he spoke. Inside Alexandra's room, Chen took an internal call. The officer on duty said someone important wanted to speak with him directly. Chen frowned. A deep, clear male voice came through the speaker, respectful but weighted. "This is Robert Hale, Executive Secretary of SkyVista Airways. Alexandra Pierce is being held in your room." The name Alexandra made Chen freeze. Hale continued, his tone no longer indirect. "We are aware Alexandra is being detained. She was assaulted. Our legal team is on the way. And one more thing." Hale's voice shifted to reverence. "Alexandra Pierce is the CEO and owner of SkyVista Airways." In the first second, Chen thought he misheard. In the second, he understood that every bit of Alexandra's composure, clarity, and absolute lack of fear made perfect sense. In the third, he realized Brenda Collins had just destroyed her own life. Alexandra sat still, showing no surprise when Chen returned, and looked at her with a subtle shift in his gaze, the gaze of a man who had just realized he was not handling a routine in-flight altercation, but an assault on a CEO aboard her own aircraft. The door swung open. Michael Foster rushed in with an iPad in hand, breathless as though he had raced across the entire terminal. The moment he saw Alexandra, he nearly collapsed. "Ms. Pierce, are you all right?" Brenda, standing outside, drained of all remaining color. She mumbled without sound. Ms. Pierce. Chen took the iPad and opened the footage from the aircraft's hallway camera. The image was unmistakable, Brenda charging forward, the full strike visible, undeniable. The room fell into a terrifying level of silence. The opposite interrogation room opened. Brenda was called in. When she faced Alexandra for the first time since the slap, every ounce of her false strength evaporated into ash. "I did not know who you were." I thought Alexandra rose. Her voice was not loud, but it carried enough weight to crush any excuse. "That is the problem. You only respect those you believe deserve respect." and you abuse, insult, and harm those you think are beneath you, not because they did anything wrong, but because you think they are no one." Brenda shook her head, tears spilling from panic, not remorse. "I am not a bad person, I just—" Alexandra stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. "You saw a black woman in a hoodie and decided you had the right to mistreat her. That was not an accident. That was a choice, and that choice will define the rest of your life." Chen stepped forward. His voice fell like a verdict. "Brenda Collins, you are under arrest for assault on board an aircraft and for making a false report." Brenda screamed a raw, broken sound as the cold handcuffs snapped around her wrists. She turned toward Alexandra, as if begging for a miracle to save her. But Alexandra did not look away, did not soften, did not flinch. She stood there, calm, watching a corrupt system collapse under the weight of its own rot. There is no scene more powerful than the moment a person who abuses power realizes the one they looked down on holds enough authority to rewrite the entire playing field. No moment sharper than when they understand that the slap they threw in arrogance was the sentence they wrote with their own hand. And no truth hits harder than knowing that strike was not against a passenger. It was against a CEO, and against their own future. The executive floor hallway of SkyVista Airways fell silent as Alexandra walked in, still wearing her grey hoodie, with a thin line of dried blood at the corner of her lip. She had not changed clothes. She had not covered the injury. She kept everything exactly as it was a living piece of evidence. Employees stepped aside the moment they saw her. They did not know what had happened, but the way she moved, straight cold, completely unshaken, made everyone feel that a storm was arriving. The main conference room opened with a heavy sound like the door of a vault. The entire executive board was already inside their faces, pale as if they had been waiting for a sentence to be passed. People who once carried themselves with confidence, even arrogance in front of Alexandra, now avoided her eyes. She pulled out the chair and sat at the head of the table. No one dared to breathe too loudly. She placed her cracked phone on the table. The paused video on the screen showed Brenda's hand cutting through the air. Alexandra's voice was low, firm, cold enough to cut metal. "Here is the situation." She pressed play. In the sealed space of the conference room, the sound of the slap rang like a gavel striking in a courtroom. Several executives flinched. Others tried to keep their composure, but fear still crept across their faces. No one dared to speak. Alexandra scanned the table, her gaze lingering on the face of Chief Operating Officer Robert Walsh, a 60-year-old man who always spoke of cost budget and business practicality in every meeting. "Robert, where did this originate?" Robert swallowed. "I believe this was an isolated incident." Those words, just that small phrase, made the entire room tremble. Alexandra tilted her head, her gaze sharp enough to cut through skin and bone, and into his thoughts. An isolated incident. She activated the large screen behind her. A cascade of passenger complaint files appeared. A teacher insulted. A black passenger forced through extra bag checks twice. A young mother denied assistance with a baby seat. Automated email responses. Empty apologies. Template reports. Alexandra stood placing a hand on the table, her voice never rising but carrying the weight of 1,000 blows. Brenda Collins is not the problem. Brenda is a symptom. This system has been rotting for a long time, and all of you allowed it. The air compressed to the point where individual heartbeats felt audible. Alexandra continued walking the length of the table, her eyes moving across each face. People who had grown comfortable, shifting blame, smoothing over mistakes, covering rot with polished reports. She stopped behind Robert. He stiffened, as if a blade had been pressed to the back of his neck. You care about costs, about budgets, about shareholders. But you never cared about the truth decaying inside SkyVista's culture. Robert, she said, her voice low enough that only those near her could hear clearly, yet heavy enough to freeze the room. What you call an isolated incident cost this company $400 million in a single day. She rested her hand on the back of his chair, not touching him, yet still turning his spine to ice. And there is another cost. Trust. The thing you let fall to the floor and left to be trampled. Robert opened his mouth to respond, but Alexandra raised her hand. A small gesture light but final as a verdict. You will join the first 3-day retraining program. If you do not pass, you will be replaced. Robert fell silent, as if the life had drained from him. Alexandra returned to her seat. Her voice rang like a warning bell. From this moment forward, SkyVista will not tolerate irresponsibility, the culture of overlooking wrongdoing, or the arrogance of those who believe they are above passengers. All of it will be removed, without exception. No one in leadership moved. No one reacted, because they knew she meant it. Alexandra Pierce did not speak for effect. She acted. She looked around one last time, her gaze sharp as a laser cut. I did not build an empire for my employees to abuse power. I did not buy this airline to watch people like me be humiliated on my aircraft. And I will not allow weak leadership to dictate my culture. She picked up her phone. The cracked screen cast a thin blade of light across the table. Starting today, everything changes. No one answered. No one needed to. The storm Alexandra had just unleashed would sweep through SkyVista, clearing out everything rotten in its path. 3 months after the speech that shook all of SkyVista, the new anonymous reporting system began producing its first real signals. No more automated emails, no more empty promises, only raw truth crashing into the system like heavy stones. A report from Dallas appeared on the internal dashboard. The first person to receive it was Alexandra. Exactly 3 a.m. She sat before the screen in her dark office, lit only by the warm circle of her desk lamp. She opened the report without hesitation. The content was as cold as steel. Captain Gregory Mason verbally abused, insulted and ignored protocol toward a new gate agent. Evidence gate camera at D14. Alexandra leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the words without blinking. Mason, one of the airline's most senior pilots, 25 years of experience, a man who prided himself on being the backbone of the company, a man who repeatedly boasted that pilots are the soul of SkyVista, not the passengers. She opened the video file. The footage showed Mason cutting through the passenger line, slamming his ID card on the counter, his voice dripping disdain. I do not stand in line with children. I have a flight to command. I do not have time to waste here. Do you know who I am? Alexandra closed the video before it finished. She needed no more. An emergency meeting was called for 8 o'clock sharp. Mason arrived at headquarters with his usual irritated expression, as if the world offended him simply by existing. He walked into the conference room as though granting the privilege of his presence. Alexandra sat at the head of the table, and Mason looked right past her, as if she were an insignificant shadow. Close the door. Alexandra's voice cut through the room instantly, slicing through whatever illusion of authority Mason believed he carried. Sit down. Mason sat slowly, arms crossed, his face hardening. He spoke first as if marking territory. "I was told this was important. I have a simulator session later today." So Alexandra turned the large screen toward him. The video played. Every excuse Mason had died in half a second. Then his ego snapped back, the same ego found in people used to standing above others. "I was operating within my rights. I am the captain." "I do not." Alexandra cut him off instantly. "You are not divine. You are not the center of this company. You are an employee. And in this video, you are an abuser of power." Mason nearly jumped from his chair. "So you are accusing me based on some timid rookie?" Alexandra tilted her head slightly, a small motion with the weight of a command. "No, I am accusing you based on your actions. Based on the airport surveillance you conveniently forgot was recording. Based on the way you speak to others as if you have the right to humiliate anyone with less authority than you." She paused for half a beat. "Based on the toxic culture I am cutting out of SkyVista." "And you just stepped directly into its next removal point." Mason slammed his hand on the table. "I have given 25 years to this airline. Alexandra, did not move. You worked 25 years. You lost everything in 13 seconds of insulting another human being. That is not the fault of time. That is your fault." The room fell into absolute silence. Mason sat there breathing hard, his face flushed for the first time in his life, unable to find a rebuttal. Alexandra continued each word sharp enough to pin the air in place. "You are suspended for 2 weeks without pay. You will attend the mandatory 3-day retraining program. If you skip, arrive late, or show any attitude," she slid a document toward him, "you will never touch a cockpit again." Mason stared at the papers like they were a death sentence. No arrogance, no superiority. Only the raw truth. He had collided with a force he could not bend. SkyVista's new culture did not need him. But if he wanted to remain, he would have to change. Not because Alexandra wanted him to change, but because the old system he relied on had died the day Brenda raised her hand and slapped a passenger in seat 24B. The conference room door shut behind Mason, leaving Alexandra standing before the internal dashboard where new reports appeared in real time. An entire empire was shifting from the bottom to the top, not through advertising, not through promises, but through precise blows delivered straight to the root. 1 year after the incident in row 24B, the skies over America looked the same. But inside SkyVista, everything had changed so drastically that no one could recognize the old system anymore. The new procedures were enforced down to the smallest breath. Those who refused to adapt disappeared on their own, and those who stayed had become a new generation, a generation that no longer used power to crush the vulnerable. On a morning in Dallas, Alexandra boarded flight S4410, wearing a simple blue dress. No escort, no entourage. No one knew who she was. She was no longer in a grey hoodie, but her simplicity, her silence, and the sharp, observant gaze remained exactly as they had been the year before. Yet today's atmosphere differed from the turmoil of SV829. It felt clearer, lighter, as if the entire system were breathing with new lungs. Alexandra took her seat in 19C economy class. Passengers around her did not recognize her, and that anonymity made the change even more visible. No one snapped at the flight attendants. No one shoved for space. Bags were stored neatly. The crew's voices were steady, carrying no arrogance or impatience. The difference was so obvious she could feel it without being told. When the plane reached cruising altitude, a small accident happened, one of those true tests of service ethics. Something sudden, embarrassing for a passenger and revealing for an employee. The young man in row 20 spilled a large cup of soda. The dark liquid splashed across the floor and straight onto the pants of the middle-aged man next to him. Apologies tumbled out, frantic and clumsy. The man erupted in frustration, his voice rising as if the entire cabin were at fault. Passengers around them began turning to look. Alexandra lifted her gaze slightly. This was the real test of SkyVista's new culture, the kind of moment no one could fake, the kind where a crew member's true nature surfaced. Then a flight attendant appeared. A young woman with neatly tied hair, her face not movie star beautiful, but bright, confident, and warm. Her name tag read Chloe Adams, 30 years old, and the moment she stepped forward, the entire situation shifted. She did not scold, she did not frown, she did not sigh. She did not show even a hint of the irritation that had once been common at SkyVista a year earlier. Chloe knelt in the aisle, not hurried, not clumsy, but with the calm authority of someone solving a problem, not someone suffering through it. Her voice was gentle yet clear, with a quiet strength that soothed the entire row. Spilling a drink happens all the time. It is perfectly all right. Let me take care of it. She handed tissues to the young man. Here, go ahead and wipe up a little. Do not worry, everyone has been through something like this. Then she turned to the man with soda on his pants, meeting his frustration head-on without fear. But instead of challenging his anger, she spoke in a tone that softened any rage. I can clean the stain for you. Club soda will lift it immediately, and your next drink is on me. We have a new cola flavor today. I will bring it right over. Alexandra watched closely, her eyes following every movement, and when she saw the man who looked ready to explode suddenly laugh as Chloe joked about redirecting the flight path of the spill, Alexandra understood this was what she had worked for. A year ago, this exact situation would have been a stage for Brenda Collins to humiliate a passenger, a place where SkyVista's decaying culture revealed its teeth. But today, this same moment was where SkyVista displayed its new soul. When Chloe reached row 19, she still carried that same smile, the kind not tied to status or tips, or whether a passenger was important. It was simply the smile of someone doing their job the right way. She stopped in front of Alexandra. What would you like to drink? We just brewed a fresh pot of coffee. It smells amazing. Alexandra felt a brief flicker of memory. The image of Brenda saying we are out of coffee while the pot sat full behind her. But she refused to let the past pollute the present. Black coffee. Thank you. Chloe nodded and went to prepare it. The cup she returned with was hot, fragrant, and untainted by bias, petty authority, or power games. Alexandra took a sip. The coffee itself was nothing special, but the taste, it felt like victory. Not a personal victory, a victory for an entire system rebuilt from ashes. In the row ahead, the man and the young passenger were laughing again. The man teased. Next time you spill something, just make it a smaller cup. The young man blushed and laughed along. No yelling, no accusations, no counterfeit authority. Only humanity. Alexandra watched the scene, the cabin bright under sunlight pouring through the windows, the crew moving with ease, none of the old hostility in sight. This finally was the airline she wanted to build. No announcement needed. No recognition required. No one had to know she was there. She sat quietly in row 19, sipping her coffee, witnessing a new SkyVista take shape through small, powerful acts that could transform an industry. And somewhere inside this calm, a faint echo of last year's slap still lingered, not as a tremor, but as a reminder real power does not belong to those who abuse it. It belongs to those who repair what was broken from the root without compromise, but also without haste. A small cabin suspended in the sky. A warm cup of coffee. An ordinary moment carrying extraordinary meaning. Alexandra looked out the window, letting the sunlight pass across her eyes. She did not need to say it aloud to know SkyVista was finally flying in the right direction. Across the country, in a small dark room above a 24-hour convenience store, Brenda Collins sat on a warped plastic chair, staring into the void like someone who had survived an accident, but still had no idea what had happened. Outside the foggy window, a neon sign flickered in exhausted pulses. The night was deep, the cold wind slipped through the doorframe, and a thin layer of numbness settled on her skin. Her life had once taken her through glowing cities, polished aircraft cabins, and late nights in luxury hotels. Now the hum of an overworked air conditioner and the faint smell of burned plastic from the counter were the sounds and scents she lived with every day. Brenda's hand trembled slightly as she pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself. The clock struck 3 in the morning. Night shifts were always long. Night shifts were always cold. But the shiver running through her wasn't from the wind. It was from memory. It was from the moment the handcuffs snapped shut. It was from Alexandra's eyes, not angry, not furious, but filled with a clarity Brenda had never seen in anyone else. A kind of gaze that made her feel exposed, small, and undeniably wrong. A truck pulled up outside. Heavy footsteps approached as the driver dropped soda cans on the counter. He grumbled with a rough tone, "Hurry up. I have another route." Brenda lowered her head, tapping the register. She didn't look him in the eye. She didn't want to. She didn't dare. She had once been the one giving orders, the one standing above, the one deciding who was worthy and who wasn't. Now every time someone raised their voice, her body reacted like it had been struck by her own past. She no longer had the strength to shout back, no position to lean on. Only silence. When the man left, the glass door closed with a tired chime. Brenda exhaled, her shoulders sinking, as if carrying the weight of every mistake she had ever made. By the cheap coffee machine, a red light blinked. She poured herself a cup. The rising steam brushed her face, reminding her of the moment she had used coffee to belittle a woman in a hoodie. A simple request, a cup of black coffee, a refusal that became a sentence. The door opened again. A young man, the kind who looked like he was live-streaming a cross-country journey, walked in to buy snacks. When he looked up, his eyes froze. Brenda could feel his stare. Familiar, recognizing. But this time the familiarity did not come from her. It came from him. His eyes widened. A cruel excitement lit his face, the look of someone who had just stumbled upon a viral moment. She avoided his gaze, forcing her voice to remain steady. "What do you need?" But he didn't answer immediately. He was recording. Brenda saw the tiny green light on his phone. She saw the gleam in his eyes, the thrill of someone who had just struck online gold at 3 in the morning. She wanted to tell him to stop. She wanted to raise her hand like she used to. She wanted to shout, but she couldn't. There was no authority left to hold on to, no position to raise herself above anyone. The voice that came out was nothing more than a hoarse whisper. Please stop recording. But the world no longer stopped for her. It never had, and it never would again. The image of Brenda hollow-eyed, aged a decade in a year, hands shaking as she scanned barcodes appeared on his phone screen, then circulated online, spreading everywhere. No one remembered the slap she had thrown so confidently that day. They only saw the final result, a person paying for a lifetime with no exit. The fluorescent light overhead flickered again, like the final breath of what remained of her past. Brenda stood behind the counter, staring at her reflection in the glass. No crisp uniform, no forced smile for wealthy passengers, no hollow pride, only a middle-aged woman standing under tired white light, looking at the life she had shattered with a single choice, believing power gave her the right to diminish someone else. She touched her name tag lightly, the cold letters, a name that had once appeared in internal reports, newspapers and viral videos. Now it was nothing more than a cracked plastic label pinned to the oversized shirt of a night shift worker. And in that silence, she understood that her downfall didn't begin with the slap. It started long before, with the first condescending glance, the first sharp word, the first small whisper inside her head, saying, "I am above them." And now she stood exactly where that whisper had led her. A place no one wanted, a point no one envied, a lesson no one needed explained. And Brenda Collins, who once struck out in the sky, now lived with a single undeniable truth: a small amount of power can destroy an entire life, especially when it ends up in the hands of someone who never learned kindness. The night sky stretched beyond the windows of SkyVista's top-floor office, like a sheet of smooth black silk, with the city lights scattered beneath it, like fragments of gold. Alexandra stood with her back to the view, her hands resting lightly on the long walnut conference table. The room was completely silent, the kind of silence that follows lightning when everything has been split open but hasn't yet realized it. On the large screen ahead, the growth charts appeared one by one, complaints dropping sharply, service ratings rising, customer retention improving, internal stability strengthening, employee morale climbing. Every number moved in the direction any CEO would dream of, but Alexandra felt no pride, not even a flicker. She understood better than anyone that beautiful numbers were only the surface. The deeper layer was always the dangerous one. The door opened. Robert Hale, her executive secretary, stepped in quietly. He placed several new folders on the table. His voice was low, steady, cautious. "This is the annual report for the Cultural Reconstruction Project." Alexandra flipped a few pages, her eyes scanning quickly. The reports remained brutally honest, exactly as she demanded. Successes, failures, bright spots, dark corners. No glossing over. No loops of corporate language. Robert stood still, hands clasped, waiting for her evaluation. For a moment, Alexandra remembered the day he had answered her call from the airport security room, his voice trembling with shock. Now the tremor was gone. His tone was steadier, deeper, the voice of someone who had learned that real power did not come from loudness, but from understanding truth. Alexandra closed the folder gently. Her voice was soft. "How many people left this year?" Robert answered immediately. 708. Alexandra didn't react. She simply asked, how many were promoted based on genuine merit? 192. And how many anonymous reports resulted in formal disciplinary action? 423. She nodded, not pleased, not displeased, but acknowledging that the system was still functioning exactly as intended. Robert hesitated, then added, "There is something else, a new employee." Maya, a counteragent in Denver, sent you a personal thank you email. Alexandra lifted her eyes slightly. Why, Robert opened the folder again, his hands shaking just a little with emotion. She said that at her previous job she had been humiliated, repeatedly had trash thrown at her by customers, had been dismissed by her own colleagues. She said this is the first time she feels she does not have to endure mistreatment just to survive. Alexandra went still for a brief moment. Robert placed the letter on the table. The last line from Maya was only 2 words, thank you. Alexandra rested her hand on the letter, touching the slightly shaky handwriting of someone young who had finally found a place to stand. Not because Alexandra wanted gratitude, not because she needed admiration, but because it reminded her that culture does not change through slogans. It changes through real people. People who have endured enough to understand what fairness truly means. She turned toward the window. The city looked calm, but she knew better. It held countless small cruelties, subtle insults, quiet humiliations, so normalized that no one even recognized them anymore. And those things, if no one stood up, would spread like mold. She exhaled slowly. No one had ever told her she had to fight the entire old culture. But she understood if she didn't do it, then who would? She returned to the table and pressed the intercom. Assembled the executive board, earlier than planned. We have new changes. Robert blinked in surprise. What changes? Alexandra met his gaze. All new employees will undergo a training course on respect for both customers and colleagues before their first working day. Not through video, not through slides, in person, supervised, tested. Robert nodded immediately, not daring to question the reasoning. Alexandra closed her phone, her eyes reflecting a rare, deep stillness. That stillness carried a single truth: she would never allow this airline to fall back into the old darkness. Not while she led it. Not while the memory of the slap still echoed as the system's defining test. Not while every vulnerable person who stepped onto a SkyVista plane deserved the basic dignity human beings owe one another. Outside, the night continued to fall over the city. But inside the highest conference room of SkyVista, everything was beginning to brighten, decision by decision, person by person, grounded in the understanding that respect is not a task. It is the only foundation on which everything else can stand. From a professional standpoint, Alexandra's story shows that real power does not come from the loudest voice, but from the ability to see through what is wrong to correct it, and to force an entire system to operate with integrity. A single slap can shatter someone's dignity, but it can also expose a truth that desperately needs change. If you believe kindness is worth protecting at all costs, please like and subscribe to help spread that value, and leave a comment with the phrase, "Protect the truth."